Welcome, my dear friends. Update your knowledge along with Angel's EduTuber. Nourish your brain by updating your knowledge. With this line, let us discuss in brief about human body cavities. What is body cavity? Body cavity is a space inside the body that accommodates and protects the delicate internal organs such as brain, heart, lungs, etc. There are two largest human body cavities, the dorsal cavity and the ventral cavity. Let us have the meaning of dorsal and ventral medical terminology. Dorsal relating to the back or posterior of the body, ventral related to the front or anterior of the body. We begin with the dorsal cavity. The dorsal cavity contains the primary organs of the nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. The dorsal cavity is subdivided into cranial cavity and spinal cavity. Let us discuss a little in brief about the dorsal cavity. First, cranial cavity. This is the anterior portion of the dorsal cavity. This cavity contains the brain, the meninges of the brain and cerebrospinal fluid. What is meninges? Meninges are the covering membrane of the brain and spinal cord. Here we will discuss about meninges in the following slides. The next is spinal cavity. This is also called vertebral cavity. It is a posterior portion of the dorsal cavity. This is a very long, narrow cavity inside the vertebral column. It contains the spinal cord, the meninges of the spinal cord and cerebrospinal fluid. We'll have picture explanation of the cranial cavity. This cavity contains the meninges, outer covering layer, dura mater, middle layer, arachnoid matter and the innermost layer, pia mater. Meninges of the brain, CSF, cerebrospinal fluid and the brain. To have it in memory, let us have the acronym of meninges. D for dura, A for arachnoid and P for pia, DAP. Picture explanation of the spinal cavity. This cavity contains CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, spinal cord and the meninges of spinal cord, which are dura mater, arachnoid matter and pia mater. Let us move on to the ventral cavity. As we discussed earlier, ventral cavity is an anterior of the body or front of the body. The ventral cavity contains the primary organs of the cardiovascular system, respiratory system, gastrointestinal system, urinary system and reproductive system. The ventral cavity is subdivided into thoracic cavity, abdominopelvic cavity. This thoracic cavity itself contains mediastinal cavity and pleural cavity. Abdominopelvic cavity is subdivided into abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. Diaphragm. What is diaphragm? Diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscular and membranous structure that separate the thoracic and abdominal cavities, which are the basic ventral cavities. Thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity itself contains mediastinal cavity and pleural cavity. Mediastinal cavity. It is located at the center of the thoracic cavity in between the two pleural cavities, right and left. This cavity contains the heart, the major blood vessels, trachea and esophagus. Pleural cavity. Pleural cavity, which are right pleural and left pleural cavity, contains the lung. Thoracic cavity picture explanation. Mediastinal cavity, which is located in the midst of thoracic cavity, which contains heart, major blood vessels such as superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, aorta, pulmonary blood vessels, etc., trachea, esophagus, thymus gland, and pleural cavity, which are right and left and contains the lungs. The next ventral cavity is abdominopelvic cavity. This cavity, its region and organs have discussed in another video. So dear friends, subscribe our channel so that you may not miss any of our important topics. Let us revise the human body cavities in a glance. Human cavities is divided into dorsal cavity and ventral cavity. Dorsal cavity again have subdivision of cranial cavity and spinal cavity. Ventral cavity is divided into thoracic cavity and abdominopelvic cavity. Thoracic cavity itself contains mediastinal cavity and pleural cavity, and finally abdominopelvic cavity is subdivided into abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. The last section with questions. Define human body. What are the major body cavities? List out the organs of dorsal cavities. Define meninges. What are the cavities are present in the anterior portion of the body? What are the organs are located in mediastinal cavity? Hope you have learned. Thank you. Signing off, your friend.